Well, hello there guys, to a short tutorial video on the operational art of War 4. As you guys can see here, this is the introductory menu to the game. We've got new game, of course, the scenario editor, for those of you that feel brave enough to attempt to make your own scenario, and the play online button. Now, what we're actually going to be doing is going to New Game to take a look at the Aracore 44 scenario. But to find that actual scenario, we actually need to go into the default directory button, which is here on the far left, and this is going to show you each individual theater that we could actually play in. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and go to the World War II Western Front, and there is Aracore 44 right in front of us. As you can see, we also have a lot of other options down here regarding the play mode. This way you can either play against yourself or against a friend that's also in your home, sort of hot seat game. You could go ahead and play against the Germans, or you could play against the Allies. It's totally up to you guys, so make sure to choose wisely. If you take a look over here on the right side, you can actually see the location of the battle. You can see the map scale, which in this case is 2.5 kilometers per hex, and the time scale, which in this case is half-day turns. Now remember that depending on the scenario, this is definitely subject to change. If you go over here to game options, this is another thing you can focus on if you want to change your scenario a bit. And some of these game options, when turned on or off, might be much more helpful for newer players to the game. So I highly recommend taking a look at this. Well, let's get started with the main tutorial. Now, the situation briefing is quite important when you begin a game here in the Operational Art of War 4. As you can see, it's going to give you important information such as the calendar, the force proficiency of our forces, special weapons that might be used during this scenario. Luckily, in this particular scenario where there are no nuclear or chemical weapons, the theater, and of course, the victory points. So what we're going to actually do now is we're going to go ahead and click the up arrow. This is going to show you guys that there's a simpler version of the situation briefing, and of course this down arrow gives you a much more detailed version of the situation briefing itself. Now let's jump in and see what happens. So right now, guys, a few things we want to go over. You can see that in this game we're using standard NATO counters. If you'd like to know what standard NATO counters are or what they represent, then make sure to go ahead and take a look at the manual. We're also going to be trying to do a video later on for the Matrix channel where we go over the standard NATO counters and give you guys a better impression of what exactly they entail. Now, if you take a look at the left side of the unit here, you see two dots. These dots represent the loss tolerance of the unit, which you can actually change. So for instance, if I right-click right here on the unit, I can actually order them to minimize losses, which means they'll do a bit of a probing attack, limiting losses, which is sort of in the middle, or we could go for completely ignoring losses. This is definitely something to consider, because if we go ahead and do this, then we're going to be basically doing a major attack, and you can see that right there, the dots on the left side of the unit have actually changed, which is quite interesting. If you look up in the right corner, you'll actually see a little yellow mark. Now this represents the unit's condition. Green is the best condition, whereas black is unsupplied. In this case, yellow or light yellow is close to green, but not quite there, of course, so we have to go ahead and remedy that. Now, units can be moved by right-clicking the destination, and the arrow shows the movement cost for hex. Now, for instance, if I want to go ahead and move on the road here, it's only going to cost me 1 movement point. But if I decide to go ahead and cut through the hills, this is going to cost 3 for the same distance covered. And if I cut through the farmland, that's going to cost 2 for the same distance covered. Well, I hope that helps, guys. Now, let's jump into the air panel. Now, if you select a random unit over here, you can actually look at the upper right corner to get a bit of information about the unit's health, attack, defense powers, and movement points. The pie charts over here on the bottom represent the unit's proficiency, readiness, and supply. You can see that their readiness and supply could, of course, improve, but it is what it is. Now if we go slightly below that into this screen right here that says side AS, INT, and lost, this is the air panel. And this is the summary of values related to the air war when they are applicable. The most important thing you should know about air warfare for now is that by default, your air assistant is turned on, making the AI handle orders for air units. But even if you do leave your air units to the AI, you can see here who has air superiority and what is the chance of a moving unit getting interdicted, attacked by air units with that mission assigned. Now we want to go ahead and take a look at the panel, guys, on the right side. So the panel actually has 3 different tabs. The Units tab contains the buttons related to managing your units. The most important ones you can see are in yellow. The double flags, for instance, start the resolution of all planned combats, and the button below the yellow flags is to undo your last action. These buttons are shown on the other tabs as well. The rest of the buttons let you switch between units and formations and open different reports. You can learn about their function via the tooltip at the bottom of the screen. Now if we go to the Map tab, this lets you hide or show the different types of weather icons and indicators on the map, including borders, victory objectives, and the weather itself. If you want, you can actually go ahead and take a look at the weather at any time during the game. It's rather interesting to see whether or not it's raining or a nice sunny day when you're, of course, commencing your battles. And it's actually the second button from the left on the top. So let's go ahead and click that right now, and we can see a little information about the weather on our screen. Now the last tab, the Reports tab, lets you access all the different briefings and reports. These are the same you can access from the View menu on the top of the screen. The 2 buttons on the bottom right belong to the AI mode. This lets you delegate control of some of your units to the AI and is one of the advanced features of the game. You should read up on it in the manual if you're interested. Now guys, just a few words on supply. Before we wrap up this video, I wanted to say a few words about this subject. It's a very important consideration, of course, and you can find all the details in the manual, but let's see how it works in general. Each unit has its own supply stockpile. This is depleted when moving and fighting. They replenish it from supply sources, which are either half blue or half red icons that you can see on the map depending on which side they belong to. Let's go ahead and click those right now, and as you can see, right there. What you should know is that a unit, to be resupplied, must have a line of communication to one of its supply sources, but the amount of supply it receives can diminish based on the range and the terrain. You could see that easily if you switch to the Trace Supply view using the Supply button on the Map tab. So we're going to go ahead and trace the supply view, and you can actually see the amount of supply coming through the map. Now, once you go out on these main roads and main thoroughfares such as the railroad, you can see that the supply is quite high at 17. But as we go off into the beaten path over here of hills and some forest, you can see that supply diminish all the way to 7. So obviously, if you're on roads, highways, etc., close to your main supply point, you're going to be getting supplies. But be careful venturing off the beaten path, because this could obviously cause some problems. There's much more to how supply is exactly calculated, of course, but if you keep an eye on these numbers, you should be able to keep out of trouble.